So I'm going to be presenting on a presentation we did for SEDHI, that's the Sediment and Hydrology Conference. It's an interagency federal conference that happens every 4 years, but the collaborative program funded this presentation and our attendance to that. I worked on this with Jonathan Aubuchon, Mick Porter, and Kyle McKay. So I'll mention the plan, do, check, act cycle as kind of anchoring this presentation. So we had just finished at the core several presentations that was monitoring, or reports that are monitoring, that are published and available through the portal about inundation that was happening in the 2019 event, and accretion on these habitat restoration sites in Albuquerque, as monitoring that we have been doing regularly. But now this was an opportunity for this conference to think back about, okay, we're collecting all these data and monitoring. What does this mean in informing our planning for the future for habitat management and things to think about? Okay, so the problem statement is, how can we better incorporate the trends that we're observing in geomorphic change with our habitat management strategies? And so part of that is thinking about limitations in our current approach. And then we propose like an alternative framework or some things to be thinking about when designing habitat management strategies, and also anticipating with this alternative approach, what are going to be some challenges that need to be overcome and some suggestions for that. Okay, so the case study is the Rio Grande, but there's a lot of elements that are happening here that are relevant nationally. We're concerned about water delivery, flood control, recreation, and of course, why we're all here, endangered species. Alluvial materials, so your banks are erosive, your bed is erosive. It's a heavily managed system with levees, dams, and channelization projects that have affected the geomorphic form. And we all know this, going from the original condition where there was multi-threaded channels, a lot of diversity in habitat. Now with the sediment retention, the water retention, and the channelization efforts, you get a very uniform channel with incision happening, disconnection from the floodplain, and also with incision, a lowering water table that's affecting your riparian health. So with the current restoration strategies, and looking very much from my perspective of working at Bureau of Reclamation and the Corps, we have several strategies. We do bankline terraces, side channels, embayments and backwaters, and vegetation removal of those invasive species. From the annual monitoring, we know from this as well, all of our perspectives on monitoring these sites. There's sedimentation in these excavated sites from the get-go. The first time that there's a major inundation, you have major deposition of materials and then slower accretion as that site gets inundated over time. You have narrowing of the side channels, and you have sedimentation happening at your inlets and outlets, which are going to affect your design hope of your incipient inundation on those sites. So from this approach, we have some constraints. If your project footprint is all you're going to get for increasing your habitat area, if you're excavating to increase areas of inundation, your project footprint is wherever you're excavating materials. You're also having a limited project life cycle, because if your performance criteria is inundation, it's filling in as soon as water is entering the site. And so you're setting yourself up for maintenance demands to be clearing out that sediment from your project areas. And so in thinking about these limitations, also on a broader scale, again, from the perspective of the Corps, a lot of these projects are very focused on, say, an endangered species, and I also appreciate that we're starting to talk about more of an ecosystem approach when we're doing this habitat restoration. But in reality, we also have other system concerns that are very high priority, endangering life, with flood and fire and those things. And so making space for ecosystem restoration or habitat restoration is going to be kind of a challenge in priorities always when working with the river. Another perspective, looking at how these sites were designed in the past, we were looking at a design flow, so an incipient flow when water would start entering the site. But actually these sites are affected by many flows, and so evaluating how that site's performing on these various flows, either in a succession period or over time, is an important perspective to be think about when you're designing these sites. Also, because we're setting it up for recurring maintenance, we think that this is a short-term vision, right? Your performance expectations are immediately impacted as soon as water starts entering your restoration site, and its performance is generally decreasing, in, like say contributing in inundated habitat areas. And then also a major criticism was the definition of no action. So when the Corps is developing projects or federal projects, we think about, okay, if we're gonna be constructing a site, what is the current condition? And we're always kind of evaluating, costs and benefits if we don't have any action at all. But just looking at how the river looks today is not enough picture to kind of capture that no action, because the river may be continually incising, or there may be migrating bends, or there may be several things that are happening in here. So are we capturing that in our no action characterization to talk about how urgent and important these projects are? So going into what we kind of recommend or we're thinking in response to these perceived limitations, we have a couple items talking about using conceptual models in our planning, and then also thinking about our restoration actions as based on like a tiered change influence to help kind of frame our expectations and what we're trying to do here. So with those, I'll present those 4 restoration categories with examples and caveats. Okay, conceptual models are very, very helpful. This conceptual model from Masong has been just a great, useful tool in river engineering to think about sediment transport in the river and why, say we have a migrating bend or a plug forming in the river. It's very helpful to have a conceptual model, and it's something that can be carried throughout all of the project processes, from planning to alternatives analysis to monitoring. But it gives you some context of what's happening on the site. I know at least from the Corps, there may be an eroding bend, and we're really focused on the eroding bend, but also what's happening upstream and downstream. What are some of the ecosystem processes that are being affected by change? These don't need to be very complex. Maybe it's the engineer in me saying, we don't necessarily need to go fully quantitative about how much aggradation per year, things like it. It can be qualitative, conceptually, like it is degrading, and that can be really informative as a conceptual model. And modeling or thinking about the system like this, getting your drivers written is helpful. Also to set your expectation and realistic goals, and thinking about, okay, how big is my restoration site project going to be, and how is it going to really mesh along with everything that's happening on the reach scale or more locally to the site. So restoration categories based on change influence. So this was us just really trying to organize all the things that we could possibly do to try to affect geomorphic change or try to improve restoration strategies. And I have them organized in a pyramid. The size of that layer is related to how much change influence that has. And it's also organized so things that are more sustainable in the long term versus things that are going to be more construction intensive because you're really fighting against the geomorphic form. And these are constructing geomorphic features, facilitating geomorphic change, managing sediment, and managing water. I know that we talk a lot about managing water, and we do a lot of constructing geomorphic features, but something that we can demonstrate here is that there is a little bit more of a spectrum of opportunities that may have a larger scale in between, say, these 2 extremes. So I'm going to go through all these. Oh. Okay, so I would say, looking at the examples that I gave through what the Army Corps has done in, say, the Albuquerque Reach, a lot of it just falls into this category of constructing geomorphic features. Okay, it's earthwork, you're emulating ideal geomorphic configurations, and it's excavation, right? And I've already mentioned the limitations on this. Your project footprint, at best, is what the area that you're going to impact, and they're not in the scale to influence or sustain themselves, so they'll require constant maintenance. So facilitating change. So this is to reduce how much you're using excavation and heavy equipment to actually get the change that you're, or the geomorphic forms that you're interested in seeing, but setting up the river to do the work. I would say that I know the Corps is interested in this. We have a whole Engineering with Nature business line program, but it's also, I think, a little tentativeness of having some actual examples. I'll say that we enjoy like our hard engineering, let's rip-wrap it top to bottom, but these software engineering approaches may be effective. They've been done by consultants and other groups before, but here are some examples. Improving your levee so that you can sustain higher flows, levee setbacks to increase your floodplain area, channel reconstruction, woody debris, encouraging island formation, vegetarian clearing, or increasing the water surface elevation with temporary structures. Okay, managing sediment is going to be a very big topic. We know there was the big boom of building all the reservoirs in the West, and now as they're reaching near their design life, they're being filled with sediment. So we're working a lot with even trying to figure out how to manage sediment. But conversely, the sediment retention has also affected geomorphic form and ecosystems downstream of these reservoirs. So managing sediment, what we're trying to capture here is controlling sediment supply, allowing river to deposit and scour, reverting from like the nice, or what an engineer would say, nice trapezoid or concrete structures, allowing for like natural forms to come out. So some of this is sustainable sediment management, so trying to pass sediment through the reservoir so it can get carried downstream, thinking about how you're placing your dredge material for beneficial use, and also incorporating deposition in design. Some of the things to consider, similar with like hydrology and e-flows, sediment, you have to think about when natural sediment pulses are occurring in the system, when are the species or their life cycle stages expecting sediment deposition. Sediment releases can also affect energy sources like the habitat for macroinvertebrates or biofilms, and also you may have to consider contaminant analysis. And then finally, I know we talk about this topic a lot, but thinking about managing water, because stream flow does affect geomorphic features in the riparian environment. So we're talking about timing, magnitude, duration, rate of recession, and also emulating that geomorphic or those important hydrologic events like flood and drought. But the considerations we have is climate and land use change may make the water that we're seeking to use scarce. We may not have authorities that allow for habitat use, but conversely, there may also be secondary benefits that are within our authorities, such as flood control and water delivery. Okay, so anticipating challenges, I know that these I know why we like doing the constructed geomorphic features. We have a little bit of control as far as like the real estate, you have a succinct area that you're working with, and the other ones are calling for like a larger scale, so you're kind of crossing like agency boundaries or more real estate boundaries, and so they do become more complicated. But we have some suggestion for overcoming these challenges. Prioritizing habitat management, like I said, this restoration mission may be nested with a lot of other mission activities, but if we think about our management activities in addressing other mission areas, such as flood control and conveyance, there may be opportunities, or it may still continue to be prioritized. Also, a big opportunity with the collaborative program is that we're an interagency organization, so that we have a lot of different authorities or funding or resource opportunities. Say perhaps like the Corps may not be able to just do a restoration project on their own, but if there was a tribal ask, there may be funds that the tribes can go for, or local governments can go for, or nonprofits can go for, that we can still collaborate to use different authorities to try to achieve the same goal. Also, a big thing is making the economic case for these projects. And so suggesting, I know it came up earlier, but identifying different functions during the life cycle of the project. So as the deposition is happening, are you losing your performance goals, or are you kind of moving into a different performance criteria, like having native plants grow in your deposited area now? Increasing the impact with multi-purpose projects, and also a very big and I think challenging item, again, from the Corps perspective, we love dollar signs, but capturing ecosystem goods and services and other less tangible benefits, because a lot of these projects do have benefits to us, but how do we capture that value and communicate that value to our funders? And I know this came up again earlier, public communication. We know that there's resistance to change, but using education and outreach to try to help people understand like what the natural system is supposed to look like. And then also a major item when I'm talking about using this engineering with nature approach, I know that there's an aversion to risk and that fear of failure. And so that's the importance of doing adaptive management, that plan, do, check, act, cycle, informing, how you're conceptualizing the problem, assessing how well your strategy is reaching that goal, and taking that feedback. And also realizing that there's a difference between uncertainty and risk. I have this example here of, erosion into infrastructure is bad. This is going to affect transportation and things like that. If it's eroding into the levee, that's certainly a problem with flood control and things like that. But that doesn't mean that all erosion is bad. Erosion is a natural process and may be really beneficial to getting that habitat heterogeneity. And I guess I just wanted to plug, or make note of some of the research horizons and things that we're thinking about. Again, with these larger scale projects or a larger scale restoration approach, finding resources and prioritization of projects, I know that's a priority for the collaborative program right now. We need to acknowledge that social science is really important, especially when we're talking about many stakeholders being affected by changing a scale of a project. And then, as I mentioned, all the people with dams, the sediment management is going to be very challenging and a real problem, a real cost. And so thinking about, is there a way that we can do sediment management at our reservoirs while also benefiting downstream ecosystems can be a great opportunity. And then other stuff working on is like hydrology and hydraulics being very noisy data sets, but seeing if we can use machine learning to try to find those patterns with these data. So in conclusion, the case we really wanted to make with this paper was geomorphic change should be embedded into restoration planning. There's lots of linkages here of different mission areas. And so thinking about the multiple impacts that these projects, multiple positive impacts these projects can have. And then there's also opportunities to reduce costs and maybe have greater scale benefits. So, and that's my presentation. So thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you, Aubrey. Any questions for Aubrey? Yes, Shell.
Hi, Aubrey. Thanks for the presentation. When you talk about sediment management and reservoirs, what are effective ways to get sediment through a reservoir? Or are you actually talking about having to excavate the upper delta and take it around the dam, or what's the process there?
Yeah, it all depends on every single dam's going to have their own configuration, but there is research on different types that work. And I am working on a project in Kansas where they're using their dredging. They're using water injection dredging to just try to get the sediment mobilized and pass through the reservoir. But it is a topic that I know people are looking at. So again, it's how is the dam configured, and it may just be dredging, and where do we put those materials? So. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Hello? Yeah. Okay. It does seem like in the middle Rio Grande, one of the biggest issues we have in sort of relaxing this kind of tied-in river system. Number one is depletions. We have to get water down into Elephant Butte. We cannot, even with restoration projects, have water sitting out there for long, long times, because that water is owned by somebody and needs to be used. effectively. But also the fact that we are very slowly getting to deal with these levees. And so we really are still kind of stuck in the whole jetty jack, not being able to allow more erosion to occur, more meandering. What do you think, what do you think with the Corps would really kind of move that along and get that process better, to the point that, we can all live with a system that's a better future for the ecosystem and for water deliveries?
Yeah, I think the big opportunity is if we can stop siloing, maybe as an agency that it's just going to be an ecosystem restoration project. And say with Galisteo Dam, we have a dry dam that they're doing continuous maintenance of invasive species, and that's a real dollar sign, right? So if we think about, well, what if we can reconnect the floodplain better, reduce their maintenance cost in one way, then it may make sense, like economically, or even just, how are we using this land space, replacing it. But it will take some thought. It is not, I'm not saying that it's an easy question like this, but probably with that multiple perspective, you can find some real wins there.
Thanks, Aubrey, for a great talk. Piggybacking on that whole theme, I really think it's that social connection, right? And trying to run the gamut of these ecological services and putting price tags to it, right? Because that goes right to Grace's, the heart of her question is how do you pitch this so it works for all the players that are going to be making the decisions and the citizens who right now are very skeptical that it's even solvable, right? Mm-hmm. So just back of a napkin, what's your sense of where we're at? I think the Corps has done better than almost any other federal agency in trying to get their arms around ecological services, but it still seems like a depressingly undeveloped arena. Is that your sense?
I know that there's a lot of interest. I know it's being developed, and I know that there's tools. There are tools that we use in thinking about it. I think that we've chosen the path of least resistance by having, okay, this is the real estate I can work with, this is what I'm looking at. But if we're really talking about the scale, it does require like collaboration and conversation across different agencies and different stakeholders to really, and that taking that time to listen about what those values are and then prioritizing them.